You are watching Canadian Muslim News on Muslim Network TV from Toronto, Ontario. I'm Catherine Bullock. Assalamu alaikum and greetings of peace. Up next, a conversation with an organisation that is working with educators in Vancouver to help correct stereotypes about Islam and Muslims. We'll talk to the Director of the Curriculum Development, BASSAM Abu Nadi. But first, some news headlines. CRA demands the identity of owners of offshore companies. Executive member of FSIN reported missing. Islamic Relief Canada arranges fundraising event for Afghans and Bangladeshis. UN court rejects Myanmar challenge to genocide case. Now the details. The Federal Court of Canada has ordered the Royal Bank of Canada to reveal the identity of the owners of 97 offshore corporations in the Bahamas that had used the bank's services. The companies came to light in the Bahamas leaks in 2016, which was an inspection led by International Consortium of Investigative Journalists. According to a media source, the CRA stated in its submission that it wants to confirm if the companies belong to Canadian residents. The CRA estimated in 2018 that the Canadians own between $76 to $241 billion in undeclared assets around the world. Dawn Dumont Walker, Executive Operating Officer for the Federation of Sovereign Indigenous Nations, and her 7-year-old son Vinnie Jansen have been reported missing since Sunday night. Walker is an author and a well-known advocate for missing and murdered Indigenous women. According to the police, she was last seen on Friday. The 48-year-old's red Ford pickup truck and personal belongings were found Monday morning at Chief Whitecap Dog Park in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. Local media report that RCMP staff sergeant says that the RCMP, Saskatoon Police, and volunteers are doing their best to locate Walker and her son. FSIN Vice Chief Heather Bear says she hopes the police conduct a thorough search. To raise funds for Afghanistan and Bangladesh, which have both been struck last month by natural calamities, Islamic Relief Canada is arranging a biking event on July 31st at Spokes Bicycle Rental in Vancouver. The biking event would charge $20 for a single bicycle entry and $30 for each e-scooter entry. On June 20th, around 2 million Bangladeshi people were left homeless due to seasonal monsoon flooding. The heavy rains collapsed the infrastructure of the cities Sylhet and Sunamganj. In eastern Afghanistan, an earthquake of magnitude 6.1 killed around 1,000 people on June 22nd, leaving people stranded and helpless. The International Court of Justice, or ICJ, in The Hague has ruled Friday that a case filed by the Gambia 3 years ago accusing Myanmar of the genocide of Rohingya Muslims can go ahead. The ICJ threw out all of Myanmar's objections to the case. The decision paves the way for full hearings at the court on allegations over a bloody crackdown in 2017 on the Rohingya by majority Buddhist Myanmar. Tun Khin, president of the Burmese Rohingya Organisation UK, says the decision is a great moment for justice for Rohingya. Hundreds of thousands of Rohingya fled the Southeast Asian country during the operation 5 years ago. And that's it for the news. Accurate information about Islam and Muslims is crucial in helping overcome Islamophobia. We are joined today by a Director of Curriculum Development who is working with schools in British Columbia, BASSAM Abu Nadi. Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the show.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you so much for having me.
It's our pleasure. You're doing very important work we hope to learn about in the course of our interview. Now, you're the Director of Education for Curriculum Development, and are you working with public schools or private schools in British Columbia?
So at this point, actually, we're working with both. We began working first with public schools and public school districts, and we've since branched off to private schools as well.
So what does it mean, curriculum development?
Interestingly enough, I think the name and the title might have to be reworked in the future, because though our work does focus on changing the actual resources that schools and school districts are using, we've
Mm.
often found that sometimes the resources themselves are not the problem. Sometimes it's a framework itself that needs to be reworked.
I'll ask you to elaborate that on a moment, but just maybe we should backtrack a little.
Sure.
What resources do the public schools in British Columbia use for imparting information about Islam and Muslims?
So, for the most part, with the exception of Social Studies 8, there is no single point where students are asked to learn something about Islam. So,
Mm.
learning about Islam or learning about Muslims or learning about the Muslim world tends to be a peripheral part of the learning experience. The other thing that needs to be mentioned is that teaching is, generally speaking, a hard job. So teachers are asked to be experts in a lot of different things. And for the most part, what we found is that teachers are pulling together the most low-hanging fruit that they can. And nobody should really hold that against them or blame them for that. It's just a matter of them trying to find the quickest, fastest, and easiest resources that they can find to teach the material that they need to teach the following week, month, term, year.
Mm.
And so what we found is that teachers are often just borrowing from what previous teachers used.
Mhm.
Now, as I'm sure that you can imagine, sometimes that's not always the best approach. And where we lend our subject matter expertise, we're definitely there to do that.
In Canada, education is a provincial matter, and I'm not familiar at all with the British Columbian curriculum, but I know in Ontario there are a couple of points, in one in grade 2 and one in grade 4, where you'll have what they call faith and celebrations, and in grade 4 they do medieval. And I've had colleagues who've worked on developing a medieval curriculum suitable for grade 4 that brings in the Islamic point of view. Is it different in British Columbia based on what you've just said?
Yes, it is. So the major rework that the BC curriculum has undergone in the last, okay, so let's call it the last decade,
Mm.
is they've focused much more on inquiry-based learning, and they've focused much more on big questions rather than trying to get particular historical points memorized and learned by the students, which I do believe is a good change
Mm.
pedagogically.
Mm.
What that also means, though, is that uh, ultimately the teacher as a facilitator will play a decisive role in guiding the direction of learning in the classroom. So the teacher's personal sentiments, their personal prejudices, their life experiences will also be relevant, sometimes more than they even realize coming into the conversation.
And that's what we call unconscious bias. And that's why you talked about framework rather than actual resources, I'm guessing.
Yes, correct. One of the things that, if I could use this as a launch point to elaborate,
Mm.
one of the things that I always make sure to tell teachers in any training that we do with them is, first and foremost, to avoid dark paths that lead to even darker conclusions. So if you are worried that in your school or in your classroom that students are leaving with an impression that, let's say, that religion is a problem,
Mm.
and that's not a conclusion that you want them to arrive at. So you want them to arrive at a conclusion that is more conducive to a multi-religious, multi-ethnic, and hopefully harmonious society. Then you probably don't want to be leading them in a direction that is framed along religion being the center of conflict.
Mhm. There's not very much in Canada, but some work on Islamophobia in the classroom, and students recount nasty things that their teachers have done or said to them, or talk about being beaten up on the playground and called Osama or something like that, with the teachers not intervening and sometimes disciplining the Muslim kid rather than the perpetrators of the beating. Is that a problem in British Columbia schools, which is why you kind of launched into this area of curriculum development?
So if we've reached the point that you just described, it means that we've gone, there were multiple points of intervention that should have been addressed that were not. We try to get to schools and school districts way before something like what you just described could ever happen.
Mm.
To kind of give you an idea, the definition of Islamophobia that we use at Reclaim is that Islamophobia is the distortive amplification of Islam's most exotic and culturally jarring elements for the purpose of exacerbating the Muslim question. And the Muslim question here is, can Muslims live among non-Muslims?
That's a very, I like that definition. Maybe it got a lot of big words in it. Let's focus a little bit on the responses that you're getting from the teachers. I gather that you're doing workshops and training. Do you find it hard to get the school boards to agree to come?
So maybe a bigger problem that we have in education is that unlike perhaps in some other countries, there's not usually one person responsible for pulling the trigger and saying, let's go ahead and engage in this particular training. So all the time in a massive bureaucratic organization, getting a lot of people to sit around the table to listen to you is naturally going to be a challenge. However, once we've gotten an audience with a school district, we find that the response to be overwhelmingly positive. Whether we are dealing with Muslim organizations or people involved in the public school district, because we do a lot of work facing the Muslim community as well, because there is also a lot of internalized colonialism and internalized Islamophobia that we have to deal with.
I hope to ask you about that in a minute, but first, what's the number one theme or misconception or stereotype that you get asked from the teachers of the public school workshops that you're doing?
You know, I'm not sure if there's I guess if I was going to summarize the major concern that teachers have, it's that in the era of massive overcorrections in political correctness, in an era of rapid change, teachers are very scared to say the wrong thing. So we make it very clear that based on the definition that we have of Islamophobia, not all unflattering representations of the Muslim experience are Islamophobic. Islamophobia has a lot more to do with the conclusion that you're trying to arrive at, as opposed to the particular fact that you're sharing. So we try to calm the nerves of teachers by letting them know that you need to feel comfortable in the classroom doing your job.
So tell us then a little bit about the internalized Islamophobia that you mentioned when you're working with the private Islamic schools.
So for the most part, people who are products of the curriculum in the Muslim majority countries have come of age in what I could only describe as a very distorted view of their own history. And this is particularly true with the period of history that deals with the 100 or so years right before the foundation of the nation state that they came of age in. So if I'm going to be really specific, I do a lot of work on dealing with the last 100 years of the Ottoman Empire, particularly the last 100 years of the Ottoman Mashriq, that is the Arabic-speaking portion of the Ottoman Empire. And if I'm going to hyper-focus that even more, I do a lot of work on Ottoman Palestine to help people understand what that world was like before the advent of the colonial age.
Well, I wish I had time to ask you about that, but I don't. So maybe we'll have to book you for another show. But we thank you very much for joining us today. We just scratched the surface, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam. Thank you for watching. If you like what we do, please share, like, and subscribe. Stay safe and God bless.